If we don't tell our story, who will? And those who do, they have their own bias, their own perspective, their own point of view, despite their best effort at objectivity, which doesn't really exist. And so every community, you have to speak for yourself.
Welcome to Making Peace Visible, the podcast about peace, conflict, and the media. I'm your host, Jamil Simon. In our last episode, we looked at the peace process that ended the Troubles in Northern Ireland, with an eye towards how lessons from Northern Ireland might apply to Israel-Palestine. Afterwards, our producer, Andrea Maraskin, told me about a conversation she had with a broadcast journalist from Belfast who lived through the Troubles and covered the peace process. He said if social media had been around back in 1998, Northern Ireland probably would not have been able to come to a peace agreement. That's because social media makes it too easy to spread rumors and lies. You can invent a story that a violent incident occurred when in fact no such thing happened. Or you can blow a real event out of proportion. And we've seen plenty of real-world examples where misinformation and disinformation have had tangible effects on peace and political violence. In this episode, we're looking at a new report on disinformation in the United States, published by the International Center for Journalists. The report focuses on ethnic and indigenous media outlets and the communities they serve. Researchers at the University of Maryland and Arizona State University interviewed 42 media workers, and they analyzed hundreds of articles and social media posts from Black, Indigenous, Latino, and Chinese American media outlets. Our producer, Andrea Maraskin, sat down with two of the people involved in the report.
My guest, Gary Pierre, is the editor-in-chief of the Haitian Times, an English-language news outlet that covers Haiti and the Haitian diaspora, headquartered in New York City. And as you'll hear, the Haitian Times played a protective role for Haitian Americans when they came under attack during the 2024 election campaign, even as Haitian Times staff were targeted themselves. The Haitian Times was one of 5 case studies highlighted in the disinformation report from the International Center for Journalists. We're also joined by Sarah Oates, a co-author of the disinformation report. She's Associate Dean of the Philip Merrill College of Journalism at the University of Maryland and an expert on disinformation. I started off by asking Gary Pierre why he left his job behind at the New York Times in 1999, where he was a Pulitzer Prize-winning reporter, to start the Haitian Times.
Well, yeah, before the New York Times, I worked in Florida. I worked at the Lakeland Ledger. Then I worked at the Sun Sentinel. And then was at the New York Times for about 8 years. Then at the time, it was mid-90s. The Haitian community was going through a transformation from an exile group to an immigrant group. Because when my parents came to New York in the 60s, the idea was not to settle in the United States. It was to make some money and then wait out the dictator. Well, 30 years later, the dictator was still there, and no one has gone back permanently to live. But what was happening, my generation had no understanding of Haiti or the Haitian community because the media that was out there was in Creole or French, languages that we, for the most part, did not understand. And beyond sort of like the language challenge, it's just like the quality of the news. It was kind of like inside baseball. You had to be deep in the weeds to understand what they were talking about. At the time, I was working at the New York Times, writing an occasional story about the Haitian community, and people just really love it. In today's parlance, they would go viral. And so I decided, well, this is maybe an opportunity for me to do something crazy, I guess. So I left the New York Times and launched the Haitian Times.
And then, Sarah, you're an academic and you're kind of become an expert on media disinformation. Can you tell me about how you came into that niche?
So I'm a former journalist who just kind of wanted to go deeper into things. So I decided to go get a PhD. And I studied Russian media and politics. So for years, I was the unpopular woman in the room who studied this niche thing called Russian media and then Russian propaganda. And then one day I woke up and looked at Fox News and went, wow, that looks a lot like what I've been studying for 20 years. So I went on to study and think about ways in which Trump and parts of our media ecosystem echo more propaganda than news.
So as we move into talking about the report, let's define disinformation. Sarah, can you talk about how you define disinformation, how it's circulated, where it's coming from, and how it's, I guess, weaponized?
So disinformation is the willful spreading of lies in order to achieve a purpose, whether that's for profit or political gain. And academics have spent a lot of time dancing around, is it misinformation, i.e. you don't know it's wrong, you're just telling people because you think it's right, or is it disinformation? I no longer care. I think harmful, incorrect information can be innocently spread by people and it can be spread with purpose. It doesn't matter. It has a massive corrosive effect on our society, ranging from health misinformation about vaccines to, of course, the horrible and hateful lie about Haitians that was spread by Vance and others, a lot of others, during the election period.
So tell me about the Decoding Disinformation report, and what do you consider its most important findings, Sarah?
So I think there were some very important findings, mostly that in many important ways, ethnic media outlets stand up to disinformation through their close relationship that has been built over years and decades with their communities. So, for example, that's why the Haitian Times was very effective at countering and supporting its community through a disinformation attack. And not every community has that, but we also see that you can't slap a label on an outlet. You can't say, oh, this outlet is Black or this outlet is Haitian supporting. There are multiple identities often. But what I noticed through almost all of the media outlets that we identified as Black media outlets, there was a constant reference back to historic injustice and reminding the readers that we have fought for our rights and we need to keep fighting, as a group, as a collective. And you also saw this in the indigenous media, who in 2024 reminded their readers that it was exactly 100 years since Native Americans were granted the formal right to vote in the United States. So there is this sense of solidarity. So to me, that was probably the most amazing thing. Plus, also the differences that we found in our computational analysis of about 10,000 articles across different ethnic media groups, finding that Black media in general were very suspicious of Trump, warning people about what Trump was going to do. And the Spanish language media was a little bit more, let's wait and see, much more mixed politically. So those were the things we learned.
So I believe this was what you were referencing in terms of the Haitian community. I'm sure everybody listening, at least from the United States, will be unfortunately familiar with this infamous piece of misinformation propagated by J.D. Vance and Donald Trump last fall while they were running for office, that Haitian immigrants in Springfield, Ohio, were eating people's pets. Gary, I understand that this rumor and the hate that was drummed up by it even affected the Haitian Times and members of your staff in New York. Can you talk about what that was like and how the Haitian Times responded?
That was a unique moment in the Haitian Times existence. For the 25 years we have been around, and we did controversial stories. We were not afraid of controversies. But this one was the next level because of who were involved in it. But let me back up a little bit, because this is really important to get how do we arrive to this point. We had gotten a small grant, a modest grant, to do some reporting around the elections. At first, we wanted to anchor our reporting out of Florida, because Florida, a large Haitian community, and it used to be a bellwether state. But then Michael V. Neal, a special project editor, suggested that we anchor that out of Springfield, because the Haitian Times, we had been following Springfield for at least 2 years before this, international news break. And so we wanted to go to Springfield to talk to the Haitian community and not parachute in, just anchor our coverage there and said, hey, have a town hall discussion. What's going on, guys? What are the challenges? What are the opportunities and whatnot? At the same time, we had scheduled another meeting with the city officials. Okay, what are your challenges? I know these new residents you have here, there are cultural misunderstanding. How can we help you? And everybody was in. After that debate, Springfield started getting death threats. Schools, hospitals, you name it, were receiving death threats. And Haitian community at that point, cowering. People were afraid to go out during the day or at night. And so a couple of days before we were supposed to have this gathering with the community, the city officials told us that they couldn't guarantee our security or safety because there were a white nationalist group who had planned to protest and march while we were having our event. And we said, well, let's move this online. And we did that online. And at the same time, we were writing, pushing back about the notion that Haitian migrants or residents in Springfield were eating people's pets. And we kind of did it both from factual reporting and also explaining folks that this whole idea of Haitians eating pets is as old trope as Haiti itself. It was something that people started in the beginning because how can this bunch of slaves defeat Napoleon's mighty army to gain its independence? So it had to be something weird. They did voodoo, something sinister about it. And so that's what was at stake last year during the elections. And right after the debate and coverage, we got flooded with hate mails. I mean, the most vile things you ever seen. And journalists, we've seen a lot. So we're not sort of like pearl clutchers. And we got doxxed, all of us. And then Michael, the special project editor, was swatted, as well as another woman who was part of a panel discussion in Springfield.
Can you explain what swatting is real quick?
Yes, I became an expert in swatting last year. Basically, someone will send a false police report that a crime had occurred at a certain location. And it's usually a really heinous crime to get the police attention. And the police obviously sent squad cars to the location and guns drawn and trying to solve a crime or look into a alleged crime. And our editor, a Black woman in her house in Brooklyn, surrounded by cops. And she played it well because she knew what was happening at that moment. And she diffused it with the police and said, oh, I know what this is about. This is swatting. And to our dismay, the sergeant who was there didn't know what swatting was at the time. She had to explain to them what swatting was. And the idea is to really scare you and maybe trigger some bad move where the police can shoot you, depending on your reaction. This is a situation that we were dealing with. And that's what gives us the strength and the courage to stood up despite all these attacks, because we had ICFJ, International Center for Journalists. We had the Committee to Protect Journalists and every other press freedom organizations rally and give us the support and the resources. Because one of the things that they try to do, they sent thousands of bots to our site in an attempt to crash it and to silence us. Thank God, again, we had the support necessary. We had the tech stack. We work with a company called NewsPack, and they're one of the best CMS around. And so it was about 6 months of intense scrutiny and trying to protect ourselves. I don't go the same route every day. My routine has changed. I've never had any security at my homes, and now we have all kinds of measures to protect our person and our site and everything else.
Wow. I'm so sorry that you had to go through all of that. Do you have a sense of where the attacks were coming from and if they were organized?
Well, certainly it was organized, but we didn't care to find out the fact that it was happening, and it doesn't really matter. Some of our detractors would argue that these were bots. And I said, yeah, they were bots, but somebody was directing the bots.
I want to talk a little bit more about different ways that misinformation shows up, because part of the research was looking at how media outlets counter misinformation, but another part of the research was looking at what types of misinformation affect, I guess, different ethnic groups that may not necessarily apply to the general population who, we all are affected by misinformation. So one of these phenomena was called information cocoons, linguistic information cocoons. Sarah, can you tell us what that is and why they're fertile environments for misinformation?
So an information cocoon is like, it does sound kind of warm and fuzzy, but it's actually not a great thing. It's this notion that either linguistically or culturally or through choice, you're really only consuming a fairly narrow range of media. And often for some people, that means they're essentially getting their news from social media. And if you're, not a confident English speaker and you're relying on a rather small linguistic community online, this means that scammers can find you and you can be more vulnerable. So that's something we noted as an issue. That's also an issue in terms of understanding, what's going on around in society and then making your vote choices. So if you're not able to really, or you don't care to engage with the broader news ecosystem and some of the more professional fact-based news organizations, then it's pretty easy to fall down the rabbit hole of a conspiracy, for example.
Let me add that our biggest competitors are mis and disinformation because we have to fight against that on a daily basis. But as Sarah mentioned earlier, is that we've developed such a strong respect among readers in the community that now when rumors are circulating, people are waiting to say, okay, what is the Haitian Times saying about this? Did we confirm it? And it's once we confirm a story, then people say, okay, now I know it's true. Seriously. This happened recently. Is one of the Haitian oligarchs got arrested by ICE in Florida. And so there were rumors going on. We were able to confirm it that he was indeed arrested. We got all the documentation and show it. So and then everybody says, okay, now we know it's true. And so this is part of what we have to do now. Knock down mis and disinformation and rumors and making sure that we are providing people with accurate information.
This is the whole thing that I think the heart of what we discovered when we studied ethnic and indigenous media in the United States is they're not all Gary Pierre, but there are a lot of people like him. And there's so many of these relationships going on between community-oriented, which is maybe a better term than ethnic media, perhaps, community-oriented media.
Diaspora media?
Yeah, that are really important. And through I hate to call your life a case study, Gary, but it is. It's a case study.
It's okay.
Disinformation and how to fight back.
I like that you both spoke about community. Sounds like, Gary, you and the Haitian Times journalists do have this strong community connection, but you also said that your biggest competitor is misinformation. And, another trend identified in the report, kind of within these, what we were calling information cocoons, are influencers or micro-influencers. We all know influencers as people who have large followings on podcasts or social media or streaming, who often, have strong opinions that they're usually not fact-checking. So how can journalists kind of compete against influencers or micro-influencers, especially within a certain diasporic community?
Well, the trend now is to collaborate with them because they do have an audience, and we have been, obviously. And some of these, like when we break a story or we debunk a story, we will collaborate with them to make sure that it gets out beyond our audience. I mean, as whatever audience size, it's small in the greater scheme of things. And so these influencers, they are part of their tools to combat mis, dis, and malinformation. For instance, one of the oligarch who was arrested, some of our reporting found out that he was a big purveyor and he financed misinformation campaigns in Haiti. So this is serious.
Well, I would like to know more about influencers, to be honest. I agree with Gary. I think the future is, working together and with the ones who are actually trying to inform the community. But the problem is a lot of them are probably not doing that. But it's a little bit of an unknown.
The American Press Institute has been doing a lot of research and work on that space. They've taken the lead on that, trying to really connect the media, regular journalism outlets with these influencers. And working with us, hopefully they'll understand fact-checking, what the importance of that. And then we learn from their audience because whether we like it or not, they are part of that ecosystem. and they are foot soldiers. They have access because of what they do. What we do is important, but sometimes people find it too important, so they gravitate to other places where they can find fun or joy, whatever it is that they're looking for. And these influencers sometimes bring that, and that's important, and we have to tap into that.
Yeah, and I agree. I really worry not so much about influencers, but about influential figures or politicians who can serve as sort of lightning rods or catalysts for disinformation. And we saw that with Vance, right? As Gary pointed out correctly, there had been, rumors and disinformation about the Haitian community for decades, but it took that moment, right, for it to really flame into a horrific experience for the community. And so I worry, for example, about Kennedy, spreading disinformation, or if he believes it, then it gets to be misinformation, but whatever, about vaccines or cures for cancer or autism or Tylenol. And so I sort of see it as this constellation of influencers, and they could choose to use their power for good and say, well, let's look at the facts, people, or they could choose popularity and maybe influence and say, and echo this disinformation.
Gary, a few moments ago, you mentioned fun or enjoyment in media consumption. And I think that's so important. I mean, I grew up on The Daily Show. And, when I'm scrolling on Instagram, I'm often looking for something that's going to make me smile or make me laugh. So, a lot of people are looking for that. It's like a spoonful of sugar makes the medicine go down. And that makes me think of this issue of omission or underrepresentation. Reading the report, it said indigenous journalists who were interviewed said that the mainstream media had a lack of interest in the lives of indigenous people beyond moments of tragedy. And Gary, this sounds kind of similar to your reasons for starting the Haitian Times. Do you think omission is a form of misinformation? And given this negativity bias that exists in news consumption, what are some strategies outlets can take to present a fuller picture of a stigmatized ethnic group?
The community outlets or the mainstream outlets?
Either one.
Well, I think the mainstream outlets are that mainstream. They don't have the resources to really do the deep dive in each community. And I wish people would understand that the mainstream media has its own financial and other limitations. It has its audience. It understands that audience, and it is serving that audience. And it makes sense. Now, what I did with that understanding is said, okay, then I'll start my own publications that will inform, first and foremost, my community, and then those who are interested in finding out. Because, like I said earlier, I knew that there are moments when that will be important. The biggest stage was last year, but there's been quite a lot of other moments where the Haitian Times explanatory journalism brought a certain amount of understanding, not only to the audience, but to the journalists, my colleagues who are writing about this. So we have become sort of the source for news about Haiti and news about the Haitian community now that it is in the news. And so we have to understand our audience in the ways that, nobody does or care to know. And because that's important right there. We spoke earlier about community-centric. And if we don't tell a story, who will? And those who do, they have their own bias, their own perspective, their own point of view, despite their best effort at objectivity, which doesn't really exist. And so every community, you have to speak for yourself. Nobody will engage with you if you're weak, if they don't know who you are. And that's one of the reasons why the Haitian Times was in English. I wanted general population to understand something. Like everybody would have believed that, yes, Haitians are eating cats and dogs. But, if you want to believe that, fine. But there's a source of information that could tell you, okay, clinically, why that's not true. And so that's why it's important for people who have the opportunity, the capability, the skill set to tell their community stories to do so, because CNN, the New York Times, is not going to do that. It's not why it's there for.
I bet your web traffic went up during that scandal, and it wasn't all haters.
Oh, absolutely, absolutely. And like I said earlier, we got the courage to continue because we have so many supporters. And people show us that, look, there are more of us than them. So don't worry about them. So we got you.
To echo or to pick up on a theme that Gary was talking about, So my job initially was to go through 45 ethnic media outlets, and we basically searched for disinformation, election, Trump, all this stuff. And I found myself, of course, distractedly reading many of the articles that had nothing to do with disinformation because they just looked interesting to me. And I learned so much, and they're uplifting the culture and the history and that very specific identity. And I do think the mainstream media misses out on that when they cover a non-dominant community. It's usually in terms of crisis. It's almost never in terms of talking about, what this community contributes to us and sort of the joyful moments and achievements of the community.
I wanted to talk about an issue that came up in the report. It's also on a lot of people's minds as far as the mainstream media in the U.S., which is compromised editorial independence. We've looked at that coming from owners currying political favor, like with CBS and the Washington Post recently. But it also just comes with financial pressure. I mean, it's hard to do good journalism when your staff is shrinking. So, Sarah, I'm wondering if you could talk about some of your concerns about editorial independence from your research.
Well, there were a lot of concerns when we were discussing the Chinese American media because it tends to either be supportive of the Chinese Communist Party or against it. And it sort of depends on whether it's funded and supported by the Chinese government or not. And so we had a lot of debates about, is that really ethnic media? Isn't that more like foreign propaganda in some cases? So we were particularly concerned about thinking about where the funding came from and how honest the staff could really be about, their editorial independence. So that was a challenge. I would say, though, getting away from the Chinese issue, it's just really hard for everyone. Should you take that sponsorship from that organization that has a particular political point of view? And media scholars have complained about this for decades, but I think that the whole system is different and far more fraught now because it's very hard for these media outlets to survive without some kind of sponsorship. Gary, can you think of a single media outlet that can survive purely on circulation fees or subscription fees?
Well, subscription is such a low percentage of your revenue that, no, absolutely not. You couldn't. It's not enough. You would need about 1 million subscribers to have some sort of revenue that can sustain your business. And so, no, it just has to be a mix of revenue, and a good deal of it is advertising or sponsorship.
Then that raises the question of, so a lot of these ethnic and community indigenous media outlets, they do get grants from charities or NGOs.
That's new. That's recent. That's the last 5 years.
Yeah. And so before that, I don't see how they were surviving. And a lot of them have become a lot smaller. A lot of them no longer have print runs. They're online only, which is both good and bad. So, yeah, I mean, what you've touched upon, Andrea, is like the huge sinking black hole at the center of journalism in general. Like, who will pay?
For me, let me say this, Andrea. It's like I'm having this conversation right now. I'm thinking, this sounds so familiar. That's Haiti's media ecosystem that we're discussing now. This is what it was like when the Haitian Times would lead conversation about the state of the media in Haiti. This is the same conversation that we're having. And that's really saddens me because as an American by choice and a journalist all my life, to see that this country, the ecosystem is crumbling, because in some ways it is. We skirted over the challenge that, CBS and Washington Post and every other outlet that's basically self-muzzling and thinking twice about how will this land. And from what I've learned last year, like I said, is that the media, this is where we have to rise to the occasion, whether mainstream, local, diaspora, whatever, because that information is the biggest weapon against that disinformation and misinformation that exists in the world today.
Completely agree with everything that Gary said, but I'd like to offer a little bit of hope. Last night, the university at the Philip Merrill College of Journalism awarded the Maria Ressa prizes for journalism. And one was, of course, to the Haitian Times.
Thank you.
Yes. And another was to students at Indiana University for standing up to their administration that has shut down their newspaper. And there was a student from Columbia as well, also being awarded for their stand on covering protests on campus and not being intimidated. And when I see young journalists I am inspired and heartened because they're angry. They're not afraid. They know their rights. They know what they need to do. And we're graduating thousands of them a year as an army of people to fight this. This is the darkest time that I've seen in American journalism, American politics. But the people around me are very determined that they know their rights as citizens and they're not letting go.
Well, let's talk about some of the solutions and innovations that ethnic media outlets are coming up with to address disinformation. Gary, you talked about working with influencers. I understand the Amsterdam News has a partnership with Columbia University School of Public Health. Do either of you want to talk about university partnerships?
I always love to talk about university partnerships.
You are a professor, so I guess you're the one.
Well, it's a good question because, universities also need to step up at this time. And the University of Maryland has set up the Maryland Democracy Initiative for that exact point, right? How do we translate research and teaching into actionable things we can do in the community to help protect democracy? So we have the Howard Center for Investigative Journalism, and they're funded by the Scripps Howard Foundation. They were one of the 3 finalists for a Pulitzer Prize last year, which is pretty amazing for student journalists that were working with the AP and Arizona State University. So we are the largest newsroom in Maryland. We are not only training journalists, we are contributing to our community. We've now got a funded local news network from the Klingenstein family that is specifically looking at the health of local news and, how can we think of models to support it? So yes, this is what we can do as universities. This is the future. This is what we want to do a lot more of. So, Gary, what would you like us to do?
Teach the students that the New York Times is not their first destination. Your internship at a place like the Amsterdam News can be as valuable as anything that you put in your resume because you actually do work. The New York Times cannot trust you to go out there and do work because you're too young. We can, because our mistakes would not get amplified as much as in the New York Times. So just get them to think that, it's okay. You'll get to the New York Times eventually. But let's start with the Amsterdam News.
I think that's a great point.
So going back to that really important thread of connecting with the community, what are some other ways to really touch the community and bring them into your journalism?
Be present. I used to hang out at the churches, and I'm not overtly religious because that's where people were. I just didn't know what the conversation was or what people were talking about. We go to parties. We've hosted small convening, maybe 10, 20 people with the idea of tell us about you. What your pain points are? How can we be a partner? Because a lot of people see a news outlet as this ivory tower, and we wanted to demystify that, open that up. Yes, whatever your perception of the Haitian Times or the media outlets in your community, but we want to show you like, okay, we're humans. We're not some them. We are you. And so that's very important because when something happens, they call you first because there's a trust. They know that you're going to do a service to their story and you're not going to misunderstand it in a very, basic cultural way. Haitians, like most newly arrived immigrant groups, are very scared to talk to the media. But the Haitian Times, nobody ever said they're not talking to us. We've never called somebody and said, I don't want to talk to the Haitian Times.
You're saying it's important to show up in person and host your own live events, not just when you're trying to get a story.
Yes, because then you become part of the community. I mean, you are part of the community. And so some of the members of the community are Uber drivers, some of nurses' aid, and we are media. That's what we do.
I like that. To kind of sum up, given that mainstream outlets have their own audiences and their own prerogatives, given that there are these challenges, Sarah, what lessons do you think mainstream journalists can learn about connecting with diverse communities after doing this report?
I think after doing this report, what I learned was there's no real shortcuts to good journalism. I agree that you have to show up, you have to be present, you have to respect your sources, and they will respect you.
Gary, anything to add?
The mainstream media is challenged in many ways. It's very structured, limited from doing what we're talking about. What they need to do is really bring nuance to whatever story that they're covering, which is sometimes lacking. I don't want to be that old guy who's like, oh, these young kids today. But when I'm reading the story, I was like, wait a minute, why don't you bring some context here? Ultimately, the New York Times said that it is the only mainstream media left. Everything else is niche. And I do believe that. And that's why they made the decision to not cover New York. I mean, they'll cover the big stories, but it's not covering Brooklyn. It's not covering Queens. It's not covering the Bronx. It just leave that. The Haitian Times will do that. Documented. All these local papers do that. That's their job. Their job is to look at the big picture and give you something that it'd be useful to you. And so there is a need for them, but they need to tweak their approach to the news and understand the audience better than they actually do now, I think.
What is something that you can do, anyone can do in their own life to combat disinformation?
Well, you can not share it. There's that. At the University of Maryland, there's researchers suggest that, engage in lateral reading, which means look at a lot of sources. Don't just stay on the same webpage that's telling you that all vaccines are evil, Look at different things. Don't just look at the AI overview. Take a few minutes to do this. And you know what? Maybe support your community media by subscribing or donating. And in this way, we can all empower a much better information ecosystem.
I agree with Sarah. I mean, people just have to double check the information. Double check it. It's easy to do. And don't share it because you amplify it when you're sharing it. Question everything.
Well, Gary, Sarah, thank you so much for joining me.
Thank you so much.
Thanks for having me. It was a pleasure.
You can find a link to the report, Disarming Disinformation, United States, in the show notes. It's actually the second in a series looking at disinformation in 5 countries around the world. Special thanks to Nabeelah Shabbir from the ICFJ for connecting us with Gary and Sarah. I've been thinking for a few months now that we should get an influencer on the podcast, but now I'm really convinced. If you follow any influencers or content creators who talk about peace or journalism, or if you're an influencer, will you let me know? You can email me at andrea@makingpeacevisible.org. The Making Peace Visible podcast is produced by me, Andrea Maraskin. The associate producer is Faith McClure. Jamil Simon is the executive director of Making Peace Visible. Thanks so much for listening.